Hello and welcome to part 1 of chapter 3 of my Catholic superhero novel, Task. Thank you so much for clicking on the video. Let's begin. Chapter 3, Family Business. Mark was standing on the other side of the portal, fuming. "You couldn't call me?" he asked. "I left my phone on my desk." "I know," he shouted, and then he hurled Matthew's phone at him. The nullfield caught it, and Matthew grabbed and pocketed it. Mark had used his power to add force to the throw, not that it mattered against Matthew's nullfield. "Thanks for that," Matthew said. "You spend a whole minute powering up?" Mark ignored the question. "What are you wearing?" Mark asked. He rubbed his forehead with his hand. He was younger and shorter than Matthew, and had wavy, dark hair and bright brown eyes. He had the frame of a linebacker, as opposed to Matthew's quarterback's build, but his tailored suit fit him well. "I forgot my suit again, didn't I?" Matthew asked. "How could you forget your suit at HQ?" Mark asked. "Well, we had a brief combat scenario play out with Star." "Combat? Are you serious?" "And then Samantha decided it was time to reveal her feelings for me." "Unbelievable," Mark said. "One woman when you're awake and another when you're asleep. Make a choice, Matt." "Already chose Maggie, Mark." "Then you either tell Samantha to back off or figure out how to wake up Maggie so everyone will know the truth." "Of course, it's so simple. Why didn't I think of that?" Matthew shouted as he slapped his palm to his forehead. Mark grunted. "Come on. We definitely need Mary to check your pulse before we move this client." "Where is she?" Matthew asked. Mark started out of Matthew's office, and Matthew followed him. "By the elevators on the staging floor." "And who's with the client?" "Luke and Ann are doing their usual tap dance to buy you time." "Good. I wanted to see them before I go on Faustina's show." "You and I need to have a meeting after you move this client, Matt." They got to the elevators. Mark jammed his finger into the call button. "I've got to see Faustina and John, and then I have my check-in with Dad." The elevator opened and they stepped inside. "Then when do we meet?" Mark asked, barely containing his frustration. "Don't I have lunch with you and Nisha today?" The elevator began to descend. "Nisha's helping Mom all day. It'll just be the two of us." Matthew nodded. "Good. Hopefully we can talk about more than business." "You know, Matt, that would actually be nice," Mark said. The elevator doors opened, and Matthew and Mark stepped out to be greeted by Mary. She was of average height and build, and she wore her brown hair in a tight bun. Her dark brown eyes were calm, and her smile was kind. Just seeing her gave Matthew a feeling of peace. "Mary, how are you?" he asked as he gave her a hug. "Better for having seen you," she said. "Let me take your pulse." Matthew gave Mary his hands, and she held them lightly. She was not truly taking his pulse, it was just how they talked about her use of her power. Mary could not store and discharge kinetic energy like Mark, or manipulate temperature and ice like Faustina. Instead, her power enabled her to touch another child of the outpouring and learn about his power. She also could tell if and how a power was being used. "Most of your strength is going towards the phenomenon." That's not. "Towards to the phenomenon" is not good English. Let's get rid of that. "Towards the phenomenon." Wow. How many months did you not see that, Josh? All right, that's why we're doing this. "Most of your strength is going towards the phenomenon," Mary began. "You're more spent than normal, but you're still good to move the client," she continued. "And I can just barely feel the connection with Maggie." "Please keep your voice down, Mary," Matthew said. "I don't want the client to hear." "Don't worry, Matthew. Anne and Luke are distracting him," Mary said. "Let's go," Mark said. Matthew and Mary followed Mark across the staging floor, a massive, mostly empty space subdivided by bright strips of caution tape precisely applied to form squares and rectangles of various sizes on the floor. It was so enormous it almost seemed meant to be a warehouse for aircraft carriers. One thing stood out: a stone castle, complete with a portcullis and pennants hanging from the battlements. Near the castle stood the client and his entourage. Anne and Luke faced the group and appeared to be sharing an amusing story. "Which client is this again?" Matthew whispered. "Tech guy," Mark replied. "Which one?" Matthew asked. "The space guy," Mark answered. "The one we like?" Matthew questioned. The one we like, Mark confirmed. Okay, Space Guy we like, Matthew repeated. Space Guy saw Matthew coming, smirked, and rubbed his chin. The rest of the group turned, and Matthew watched Anne's smile evaporate when she saw what he was wearing. Luke's placid expression did not change, but he did tilt his head slightly. There he is, my favorite client, Matthew shouted. As you can see, I really dressed up for you. Space Guy laughed. How fashionable, he said. Uncle Sam, your new tailor? Matthew went to Space Guy and extended his hand. Space Guy took it and shook firmly. I mean, the threads were free, Matthew said. Ah, a cunning businessman always looks to cut costs, Space Guy joked. In all seriousness, I apologize for my appearance, Matthew said. We had a combat situation, and I saw that I was late and forgot to change before portaling over. You're joking, Space Guy said, eyebrows arched. No, Matthew said. But everyone's safe now. Nothing to be worried about. I thought you made a sacred vow of pacifism or something. I vowed not to kill anyone. Didn't vow not to fight. That is an important difference, and I will take note of it, Space Guy said approvingly. All right, who is ready to move a castle? Matthew asked. Space Guy's entourage cheered. Before we move anything, Mark interjected. Anne, did we get the signatures we needed? Anne passed the tablet she was holding to Mark. We're ready to go, she said. Mark glanced at the tablet. All right, let's move it, he said. Wait, we're not in place, Space Guy shouted. You want to be on top of the battlement? Matthew asked. Absolutely, Space Guy replied. Then I'll throw in a little personal flight. No additional charge, Matthew said. Mark and Anne both looked at Matthew wide-eyed. He held up his hands. My dear siblings are no doubt going to remind me of legal liabilities, Matthew said. Mark, does that tablet have a voice recorder? Yes, he said. He swiped and tapped. Recording. Great, Matthew said. Do you all give me permission to fly you up to the battlements of your castle and agree to hold me, my employees, and company harmless for anything bad that might happen? Space Guy turned to his entourage and nodded vigorously. There was a chorus of affirmative responses. Fantastic, Matthew said. He adjusted the gravity that enveloped the client and each member of his group and lifted them up to the castle battlements. Everyone good? Matthew asked after he put them down. That was exhilarating, Space Guy said. Wonderful. What won't be so exhilarating is if I repossess the castle. Please be sure to send your payment less deposit within 24 hours of delivery. Won't be a problem, Space Guy assured. He was grinning like a kid who had stumbled into Santa's workshop. Time for the main event, Matthew shouted. His siblings had already stepped to the outside of the caution tape. We're clear, Mark said. Go ahead, Matt. Matthew reached around the entire structure of the castle with his power. He took his time, ensuring there were no gaps or grooves in the gravitational fields he was creating and manipulating. When he was satisfied, he lifted the castle 4 inches off the ground. It was a bit of a strain, but nothing he could not handle. Then, when the castle was stable, he connected to the gravitational anchors he had embedded at the client's move site. These anchors were sharp-edged and tied together precisely. They felt unlike any of the anchors he used for small-scale portals. He slowly collapsed a lane of space between the move site and staging floor, and a huge, horizontal slice of blue sky appeared above the castle. Matthew expanded the slice into an enormous breach, and then extended that breach down around the castle. Space Guy was staring intently at the portal as it descended, while most members of his entourage had their phones out to record video. Matthew drew the portal down to the midpoint between the floor and the bottom of the castle, and simultaneously sealed the portal and placed the castle on the ground at the client's move site. The staging floor was completely empty again, save for Matthew and his 3 siblings. Whew, I need some water, Matthew said. He bent over and rested his hands on his knees. Mary came to his side and placed a hand on his back. You need to take a break, Matt, she said. No powers until after lunch. No argument here, Mary, he said. Anne and Luke were right behind Mary. Matthew stood up straight and waved hello as Mary removed her hand. Wait. 4 siblings. There's Mark, Luke, Anne, and Mary. All right, we gotta fix that. All right. We'll take it from down here. Hey guys, thanks for keeping the client in a good mood. Luke and Anne shared a look, and then Luke placed a hand on Matthew's shoulder. How are you feeling, Matt? Anne asked. Tell the truth. Oh no, the double team, Matt said. Tried and true, Luke said. Matthew looked up at Luke, who was a good bit taller than he was. He had blonde hair, Mom's easy smile, and eyes like Mary's. Luke's power enabled him to sense the emotions of anyone he touched. When combined with Anne's ability to sense lies, there was no way Matthew could hide how he felt from his siblings, assuming he was aware himself. I'm tired, Anne, Matthew said. I miss Maggie, and I'm worried about her, and I just want her to wake up. And? Luke asked. And I'm a little scared about talking to Samantha, and I'm more than a little happy that we just moved the last client of Q2, Matthew added. That's it? He asked. We don't know who that is. We have to say Luke asked. That's it? Luke asked. You wouldn't have asked if it was, Matthew said. True, Luke said. Double true, and confirmed. Matthew took a deep breath. It should be I'm worried about tonight. He wouldn't say I am worried about tonight. Too formal. I'm worried about tonight. I want Jose and Faustina to hit it off, but I also don't because she's my baby sister and she's still just a kid. There it is, Luke said. He put his hand at his side. Matt, she's 19, Anne said. She's young but not a kid, and you are not her father. But I am her godfather, Matthew said. Anne smiled. She was somewhat taller than average, and her pinstripe suit and stylish bob gave her a pretty and means business vibe. She had hazel eyes like Matthew and Faustina, and carried herself like Mark, brashly. True, she said, and you're the one who suggested she and Jose meet. Speaking of meeting people, Mark said from the edge of the staging floor, don't you have some meetings to get to, Matt? Faustina's stream, Matthew said. He looked at Mary pleadingly. Matthew, no powers, she said. All right, he said. You really got Mom's no down pat. Mary held up her hands and shrugged as if to say, guilty. Mary, Anne, Luke, I'll see you at dinner tonight. Please be nice to Jose. Mark, want to share an elevator with me? Oh, yippee, Mark said. I'm giddy just thinking about it. Matthew laughed. I hope you change before dinner, Anne said. Into something nicer, to be clear, Luke added. Matthew smiled and waved off their comments. He and Mark walked back across the staging floor to the elevators. They rode up and chit-chatted about the family, and when they exited, Matthew went right where Mark went left. All right, we will end part 1 there. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe, and of course, leave a comment with your feedback. I really appreciate that very much. Thank you so much. God bless you, and have a great day.
Ooh, ancient province.